There we go. All right, we're recording for our Photoshop composites. So again, today we'll be doing a demo using different methods of compositing in Photoshop, also Photo P and Photoshop Mix on your smartphone. Using the quick selection tool and then the paintbrush and how to free transform, basically change or flip around your subject layer and adding adjustments to your subject layer, and then showing you how to use a refine edge or mask tool. Then you guys will composite 3 subjects onto 3 different backgrounds. So I want to see a subject on a background and then attempt to match the subject either with color, contrast, exposure to the background. If you shot it pretty close, then you should be fine. It just depends on how you shot your background and subject photos so they match well. Additional adjustments encouraged. Can add shadow if it works with the shot. So if you're interested in that, I can do that tomorrow or Friday. Make sure to save a PSD version when you're working, so it saves your layer so you can keep working on the file as you go. Once you're finished with your 3 composites, then you're going to flatten it and save it out as a JPEG and upload it either to a Flickr album titled Photoshop Composites or to a Google Slider doc. And then this is due Monday, January 11th for 40 points. So I'm giving an option. If you want to get 5 extra credit points, you can present it on Monday for those 5 additional points. I did record a video last spring on how to do composites. It's only for Photoshop though. It's here as well, so you can see that. I'll be recording this session, which I'm doing right now today, so I'll be putting that link here as well, showing you Photo P and Photoshop Mix as well. I did add these videos links here. This is compositing with Photoshop Mix. This video is also down here as well. He does a really good job explaining the full program with Photoshop Mix, where to find everything, how to cut out a subject, how to blend, use blending modes, how to free transform your subject layer, all that stuff. So that is a really good one to watch if you're using Photoshop Mix. If you are using photop.com, I put a link here. It is here as well. This woman does a very good job showing you how to select and use a brush to mask out a subject in Photo P, and then how to export those out correctly. So these are 2 good videos I would watch just when you start compositing. It is a very challenging thing to do, so that's why we want to make sure you're doing it correctly. And as we're recording this, I'll put that link up once it's recorded, and I can share that out. So going into Bridge, what I'm going to be doing is, so this was the final composite I used for the FFA editing contest. So what I'm going to be doing is using this as my background photo. So basically, I took that photo and then flipped it and made a kind of forever, horizon look. And then I used this photo as my subject photo. And so then, I basically moved him over and adjusted his layer, so then he kind of matched the colors of the sunset, so I had this nice adjustment layer. So what I'm going to do is open up my background photo first into Photoshop. Then I'm going to open up my subject photo into Photoshop. And so now I have these kind of 2 tabs on the top of my screen in Photoshop. So I'm just going to go to my Move tool. And then I'm going to click on my subject layer, so whatever your subject layer is. I'm just going to click on the tab here, click and drag, and snap it off. And then I'm going to use the Move tool, click inside my photo, and drag and drop that and let go onto my background. And so then it basically, you'll see in my steps, I opened it, and then I dragged that subject layer onto my background photo. When I have the Move tool selected, I can obviously move it around, and you can see my layers down here. I have my background layer, and then I have my subject layer. So those are my 2 layers. If you need help placing your subject, what is useful is your opacity. So you can, again, bring the opacity down to 40% or whatever percent you want. So then you can kind of move it around. If you really want to line up your subject on something, you might want to do that, And then for people that might be blending their layers, using a blending mode, doing the kind of double exposure look for your composite, right above your layer, when you have your subject layer selected, make sure You can choose multiply for a dark blend. You can go down to screen for a lighter blend. You'll kind of notice each one kind of blends differently when you try them out. Overlay and soft light are kind of contrast blends where they blend the two layers together. So some of you have seen, photos like that where they use blending modes. Those are what they are. So let's say I want to do a multiply blend. That I'll just put it to multiply. And again, I can change the opacity on my layers, if I want it to kind of be more see-through. Totally up to you. So I'm just going to move this back to normal because I'm just doing a normal composite. So what we want to do is basically select our subject and add a layer mask to cut him out from the rest of this bridge photo. So then he would be just with the sky. So what I'm going to do is go over to the quick selection tool. It's kind of the fourth one from the top. And how the quick selection tool works, you have this little guide if you want to click learn how. It is kind of useful. It kind of shows you step-by-steps on how to make selections and quick selections. So very useful, that discover feature now. So basically what you do is I'm going to zoom in on my subject, pressing Control or Command plus, and then using the tool, I'm going to click, and then I'm going to start basically clicking around, and it's going to guess what my subject is the more I kind of click around. So I'm going to add his shoes here. You'll see, depending on how you shot your subject photos, some selections are easier, especially if you shot your subjects on a clean background. Some of those are easier. And sometimes, as you can see, it's kind of grabbing some of these trees because it's having a hard time separating the pole from the trees in the background. So I can fix that in a second. Oh, that did a bad job. Come on, dude. Problem is this is pretty similar to this shade. So I'm just going to get as close as I can. Just going to move up, grab this guy here. Oh, no, that did too much. There we go. It's looking better. And anytime you want to take off, you can click the minus button here, or you can hold Alt or Option. It'll change that plus to a minus. And then basically you can help it take off areas you don't want if it's selected too much. I'm going to kind of get rid of some in this circle. If it's still having issues, you might want to just brush it with the paintbrush. I'll show you that in a second. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. I'm going to minus Alt the section here between the shoes. And then the little gap up here, I'm going to hold down Option, and then that did a good job. Anytime, you can see here, it did a really good job selecting because it's against pretty much like a white background with the sky. But the second we get to like similar values, where you got kind of dark objects against dark objects, it's going to have a hard time separating because there's no contrast to really do. So once I'm happy with my selection, all I need to do is go down here and click Add Layer Mask, that little kind of Japanese flag looking box. And what that does is whatever's inside my selection will be left white, and whatever is outside it will be made black. So that's how layer masks work. It shows white will show what's in the layer, black won't show what's in that layer. I'm just going to show you one other option too. It's a newer feature. So I'm just going to go back before I selected, and I'm going to be on my quick selection. There is a new feature now called Select Subject, and that basically is Photoshop guessing what your subject is. So I'm just going to click on that. Sometimes it does a really good job by itself. Sometimes it does not. So as you can see here, if I zoom in, it did really good on, again, the kind of separated parts, but it kind of had a hard time with the pole because, it's against all these trees. So I'm just going to keep adding to the selection, right? And I'm just going to kind of add this. So again, you can keep modifying the Select Subject feature. Oh, that's too much. So what I'm going to do is add that layer mask again, and then I'll cut them out, like so, right? So then once I have them cut out, what I can do is a couple things to make the, selection improved. You'll see, there's a gap here, missed, There's some white stuff here. Once we get down, especially to the shoes, around the laces and the feet, it's got the trees here, right? So we don't want to have that stuff kind of messed up on the pole here. So what we can do are kind of two options. The most for sure works every time, also works in Photo P option, is your brush tool. So when you select your brush tool, make sure you have your mask selected. If you're on the subject layer, and that's highlighted, and I start painting, it's going to paint on my layer. We don't want to do that. We want to paint on the layer mask, so make sure your layer mask is selected. So again, with the brush tool, you can change the size and the hardness of the edge. If you have a sharp edge, you want to have a hard edge, right? If it's too soft, I change it to a soft edge, it's going to be all fuzzy, and that's not going to look right, right? If you do have a fuzzy edge, though, then you'd use a fuzzy brush. So then, it really depends on what your edge is. So I'm going to increase the hardness up to match my edge. And then with my brush set to black, so I set it to black, I can paint with black anywhere I don't want, that part of the layer to show. So black doesn't show, white does show. So then what I would do, I would just, Control plus and zoom in, and then start painting. Again, you can use the brackets next to the letter P to change your bracket size. It's the same as Photo P2. And then just painting off, areas you don't want on your background. If you mess up, let's say you paint something off accidentally, you can switch this to white, same as Photo P, and paint it back. So a lot of times I get graphics kids who use the eraser tool to erase off a part of a layer. The problem with that method is if you accidentally take off something and you didn't catch it, you can only go back 20 steps. And so if it's past the 20 steps, you just erased it permanently. With a layer mask, because it's on a layer mask, you can paint, stuff off with the black. So I'm just going to paint off the trees down here by the shoes, right? Like so. And if you mess up, you can switch it to white and paint back, right? Like it took off part of the shoe here. I can paint that back with my white. So that is the benefit of using a layer mask instead of the eraser tool. So I would spend more time, going around my subject. One important thing to know is if you want to go in a straight line, like if you have a product or something that has straight lines, something that'll save you a lot of time is when you click, hold down Shift and then click again, it'll go in a straight line. And so I'm going to make my brush a little smaller here. I'm going to click here, go to the top, hold down Shift, keep holding it, and then click again. If you just hold it down as you go, you can keep going in straight lines like so. This will save you a lot of time going around a subject, especially if it has straight, edges. If it has curves, you can kind of be more, thorough with it. So I would spend more time kind of retouching, really making my cutout good. But because of time, I want to make sure we move ahead. And so basically, I would just keep going around my subject and make it look as, good as I can where I, have it. And again, I can go to my move tool and I can move him around, if I wanted to place him in different parts, like so. So another thing that's a bit more advanced, I'm going to go to my quick selection tool, and it gives me this option here to select a mask. So just make sure you're on your mask, and then click Select a Mask. And what that lets you do is use this Refine Edge Brush tool. And what the Refine Edge Brush tool does is when you paint it around a subject, it'll usually do a better job making the edges look better on your selection. So I'm just going to kind of paint it, and it kind of thinks for a second, and then it basically will recognize where the edge is, because you're kind of telling Photoshop, okay, this is where my edge is, and you're comparing it to what's on the background layer. And so it usually does a better job cleaning up those edges. So let's go down to the shoes. So yeah, it's doing much better with these shoelaces here. Let's get this other shoelace here. There we go. Sometimes it'll get wrong, especially like here where the trees are. It's going to have a hard time still separating this bar from the dark trees around it. But it does look a little nicer. So it really just depends. But this is the tool I would use if I had hair, you know, and I shot my subject against a clean background. It would do a much better job with like fine hair if you use the Refine Edge tool here. Once you're finished, just hit OK. You have these global refinements here. So if you want to shift the edge in and kind of cut into your selection, contrast basically makes it a harder edge. You can feather the edge so it kind of softens it up if it's like, you know, was too sharp or something. And then smoothing, basically, if you had kind of jaggedy chunks, it helps to kind of smooth out all those edges. So you might want to try some of these global edges, global refinements. Once you finish, hit OK in the bottom right, and then it'll apply. So this was, you know, let's go down to the shoes where it kind of did a lot with the laces. This is before, and then this is after, right? You can see it did a much better job. And you know, as long as I'm on my layer mask, I can go back to my brush and still keep painting stuff on or off with my black or white brush. So then I would just kind of spend more time with that. So to save it and to keep working, let's say I kind of started on one day, I want to finish it the next day. I'm just going to go File, Save As. And I'm going to make sure it is a Photoshop format. It should say .psd in the name. So I'm going to call this, you know, V4. Make sure the layers are selected so I can keep using those layers later on. So I'm going to hit Save and OK. So let's say, you know, I worked on it today. I want to finish it up tomorrow. So I'm going to go back to Bridge. So here's my V4 PSD file, right, that I cut out. You'll notice that the file size get really big in PSD files because they're really basically doubling each layer, and any layer mask, it really increases the size. So I can open this back up into Photoshop or Photopea. Photopea, you can save PSD files. I'm just going to click back onto my mask here. Again, if you don't click back on your mask and you start, you know, painting, I'm going to zoom in so you can see it better. If I started painting, it's going to paint onto my subject. So make sure you're on your layer mask, and then you can keep painting off, or switch it to white and paint it back. So what I did want to show is how we can do adjustment layers to just our subject layer. So as you can tell, maybe I want to adjust the exposure on my subject, or maybe I want to adjust the colors to match the sunset colors. So what I can do is go to these adjustment layers here. If I click on this, it gives me options. So levels would be my exposure. So again, the right tab is your highlights. The middle tab is your midtones. You can lighten and darken those. And your shadows, you can increase the shadows, right? As you notice, if I change it, it's applying it to the background and my subject layer. It's applying to all layers. If I just wanted to do it just on my subject layer, I hold down the Alt or Option key. I go in between those two layers, and I get this little box with a down arrow. So I'm just going to Alt, Option, and press click. And now it snaps it to that layer. And so then it'll only affect my subject layer. So you can add any adjustment layer, hold down Option and click in between so I can detach it, or I can Alt, Option, and then click, and then I'll attach it. So then I can adjust it to, you know, match kind of the exposure of my background layer. So I'm actually do something like this, maybe shadows. So the colors, maybe I want to change the color. So I got all these different adjustment layer options. So let's go to color balance, right? I want to change. So let's go into my shadows. I'm going to zoom in so I can kind of see it better. Again, I want this attached, so I'm going to press Alt or Option. Go in between, I get the little box with the arrow. I'm going to Alt click or Option click on a PC. Now it's attached, and so then I can add, you know, some magentas, maybe some reds and some yellows. That might be too much, but you get the idea. So this is before and after. So it's just adding those colors just to my adjustment layer, right? So if it's too strong, I can always bring the opacity down, so it's like 50% of that adjustment. So that way it just looks closer and nicer. Because these have layer masks, let's say it didn't want it on the bottom half, I can just get my brush, set it to black. Maybe I'm going to use a soft edge, so I'm going to bring down the hardness. So then I'll just paint it off on the area where it should only really affect him on the top. So now you can see on my layer mask, I could just paint off black the areas I don't want that adjustment layer to go. So then I would just save it out. So it saves those layers as a PSD. Once I'm happy with my composite and I'm gonna turn it in, I need to flatten my layers. I'm gonna go layer down to flatten image. So basically combine all those layers together, and then it'll give me the option to go file, save as, and save it as a JPEG format. So I'm gonna click on format, change it to JPEG, make sure it's in the right folder, it says .jpg. I'm gonna make sure my quality is good, and then hit OK. So then, if I go to bridge, I have my PSD with my layers, so that I can keep working on, and then I have my finished JPEG, and that's what I would upload to my Flickr album or my Google Docker slide. So I'm just going to trash those. Or actually, no, I'll keep that so we can keep working on it tomorrow. I'll keep the PSD. So what I'm going to do is show this in PhotoP, which most of you guys will probably be working from for this project. So go to photop.com. And PhotoP is slightly different, I figured out. So what I'm going to do is go File, Open, on how we kind of open up the files. So then I'm just going to go, I believe that was called Andrew Optics 17. So I'm going to go to that. That's my background photo. And what I want to do is place a new photo on top of it. So I'm just going to go File, Open in Place. And then that was Andrew Optics 12 was my subject photo. I'm going to click Open. So what it's going to do is it's going to place it. You can see my background layer and then my subject layer. So I can, move it around if I want to. It also gives me the option to free transform it or size it. And then once you're done, just hit the check, and then I'll confirm it. So then we got my layer placed onto my background layer, right? So again, I can turn the eye on and off to see it. So again, I can change the opacity. If I need help kind of moving it, I can still move the photo using the move tool here. I can still move it around, if I want my subject to a different area. And I got my same blending modes as Photoshop. So I got my multiply, my screen, overlay, and soft light, right? So if you're doing those blending modes. One thing that is useful that I didn't show in Photoshop, it's the same as in PhotoP, is go to Edit, Free Transform, if you want to change the size or rotate your subject. So if you go to a corner, you can pivot it and rotate it. If you click on a corner box and hold Shift, you can size it. If you let go of Shift, it'll be kind of a free transform. Otherwise, if you want to keep the same ratio, hold down Shift, and I'll keep that ratio. And then I think there's a warp option here. Photoshop has a bit more options. You can right-click, control-click in the middle of it, and then it gives you options to flip it different ways if you want. I'm just going to click warp and see what it does. Oh, so you can really kind of warp and shape inside the photo if you want. It's kind of slow. I'm just going to hit the check. Yeah. So you can kind of warp the shape of it. It's just kind of cool. Okay. So I'm just going to go back a step. So what we can do is to select our subject, we're going to go to Quick Selection. Object Selection, it's going to analyze it, and it's going to do a guess on what your subject is. And then I'm just going to kind of go over the subject. And so you see the plus should be around your subject. So you can see it did a pretty good job selecting my subject. So that is pretty useful. It did miss his shoe here and some of the pole. But I could keep adding to that, or I could use a refine edge. You can also do the quick selection tool here to keep adding to it. So again, just like Photoshop, I'm going to zoom in, pressing Control+. And then I can change the size of it here. if I want to change the brush size. So then wherever I go, so it needs to rasterize it first, just hit OK, that's fine. So then wherever I click, I can keep adding, and then if I click minus or press Alt, I can take off, right? So you can see it did a good job removing that section there. So then I would just kind of keep going around my subject. So you notice it grabbed all this stuff down here, so I don't want that. So I'm just going to do a minus around my subject and take off these selections. And then take off this on the side. There we go. I'm going to zoom back in. So Control plus to zoom in, Control minus to zoom out. And then I'm going to go to the plus selection and keep selecting. If it messes up, I'm going to press Alt or Option, and I can take off the selection. So then once I get it as close to it as I can, so I'm going to add some of the shoe here. Then I would just go and add a layer mask. So that's here. Add your mask, and then it's cut out, right? So you can see added black around my selection and white inside. And then I can keep refining it using my paintbrush tool. So set to black, I can paint off, and set to white, I can paint on. And so again, I would zoom in and then paint around your subject, you know, if it messed up, like this stuff here. Paint off, right, with black. And if I mess up, I can switch this to white and then paint it back with white. What I did notice, it is hard to add adjustment layers to your layer. Like I couldn't actually attach an adjustment layer. So if you do an adjustment layer, it's going to do it to your whole photo. Again, you got the levels here, color balance is here, hue saturation. So what you would have to do is basically, like let's say I wanted to increase the saturation just on my subject. What I would do is click on that layer mask and invert it. So press Control or Command I, and then just paint with my brush set to white, where I wanted that to go. So let's say, I want to do an adjustment. So then I would have to kind of do it kind of twice, where I'd kind of just paint it over my subject. So obviously it'd take more time. So again, to save this out, just go File, Save as PSD. So then it'll save it with your layers, and then you can reopen that into Photopea and keep working on it. Just make sure if you're on the mask, make sure you select the mask, not the photo, right? And then if you ever want to get rid of something, just click on that layer, and you can drag it to the little trash can here, and I'll get rid of it too. So that's useful. And then the same way as Photoshop, once you're finished, just go to Layer, all the way down to Flatten Image. It'll flatten those layers together. And then File, Export, and save that thing out as a JPEG. Make sure your quality is good, and then hit Save, and I'll download that to your computer. For Photoshop Mix, if you're using the smartphone, so it looks like this guy. It's a free app you can download. Just search for Photoshop Mix on Android or iPhone. I'm just going to pop it open. The great thing about Photoshop Mix now is it has 2 new tutorials on the home page. One, it lets you cut out and resize a donut and put it in the alligator's mouth. The second one is it lets you blend layers together, like do a double exposure look. So if you click on the tutorial, it'll load it up, and then I'll tell you in blue what you have to do. And so it'll say use the cutout tool. So you click on that, and then it says tap to show all layers. So click on that. And then it has a little auto selection. So I'm going to press that. And especially if you shot it on white, it did a good job, but it did miss the center of that donut. So what it's saying is use the subtract tool. So I'm going to zoom in using 2 fingers. It shows you how to do that in the animation. So I'm going to zoom in. And then I'm going to press the little area inside the donut. And then there's a tap to refine option. So I'm going to use the refine tool. And you can basically feather that edge using this feather. You can kind of feather it up and down to kind of make it a better edge. And I'm gonna hit check. So then it's saying tab to hide layer stack. So I'm just gonna press that. And then I can free transform and move the donut. So it's kind of showing you. So I'm just gonna, move it over here so it's in the teeth. There we go. That's looking better. And then it says great work. Okay, got it. So it just kind of shows you some of the tools, which is very cool. The other one is the flower and rain tutorial. So it gives you a photo of flowers in a pot. So what we want to do is how to blend it with another photo, like a dual exposure. So it's saying, start with selecting a look. So let's do portrait. And it says now select the flowers. So what I'm going to do is just going to paint over the flowers. It's kind of awkward holding it. And then it says, great, now let's invert it to make the flowers stand out. So I'm going to press that. So now basically made the rest black and white, get the flowers in color. I'm going to hit check. Now it says, let's add a second photo. So I'm going to click the little plus button here. I'm going to go, so you can go to your other photos on your phone, image, and it has one loaded with rain. So you can see the rain photo here. And now it wants us to blend it using those blending modes. So same as Photoshop, we got the different, we got darken, multiply, lighten, all those different options. So it wants us to select multiply. And then you can adjust, the percentage of it, and then hit check. And then that's our blended photo. So pretty good. It has tutorials. What I would do if you're using Photoshop Mix, really watch the video here on how to use Photoshop Mix. This video goes through all the different tools.
In this one, I want to go
how to blend it, how to cut out subjects, and then how to export it out. So this one is really good. He shows how to really refine the selection, cutting out a subject, and making it look really nice. So I would try that out and check out that video. And then how to export it, right? So I would just send it to your camera roll and save it to your camera roll. Cool, I'm gonna stop the recording.